Chapter 7 How Trotsky Led the Red Army. The popular narrative that Trotsky was a pivotal leader of the Red Army during the Civil War is contradicted by numerous instances where his actions either undermined or failed to contribute to key Soviet military efforts. In July 1918, during the left socialist revolutionary uprising in Moscow, Lenin urgently called for its suppression. However, Trotsky, who had secretly conspired with Bukharin in the rebellious preparation, delayed action and obstructed the concentration of troops against the insurgents. Despite Trotsky's interference, the uprising was ultimately suppressed. Later in 1918, during the crucial defense of Tsaritsyn, which was key to preventing the unification of counter-revolutionary forces and securing vital supply routes, Trotsky actively hindered efforts to hold the city. Stalin, who was dispatched by Lenin to organize the defense, managed to resist Krasnov's White Cossacks despite Trotsky's order to surrender the city. Trotsky's opposition to Stalin's strategies nearly led to the fall of Tsaritsyn, which would have severed the south from Moscow and Petrograd. Fortunately, due to Stalin's determination, the city was held, and crucial grain supplies continued to flow to Soviet Russia. However, after Stalin's recall, Tsaritsyn eventually fell to the Whites, partly due to Trotsky's favored 11th Division defecting to the enemy. In 1919, when Kolchak's forces threatened central Russia, Trotsky declared it impossible to stop their advance and proposed retreating to the Volga. Frunze, supported by Lenin, ignored Trotsky's defeatism orders and launched a successful counteroffensive that pushed Kolchak's forces back, liberating the Urals and western Siberia. Trotsky then suggested halting the advance and redirecting forces to the southern front, but the Central Committee rejected this, allowing the Red Army to continue its successful campaign. Trotsky's mishandling continued on the southern front against Denikin. His poor strategic decisions led to the Whites capturing Orel and advancing dangerously close to Moscow. Trotsky's plan to attack Denikin through the Don steppes was dismissed by Lenin, who removed him from command. Instead, Stalin, along with Budyonny, Ordzhonikidze and Voroshilov, led the successful counteroffensive that crushed Denikin's forces by advancing through Kharkov and the Donbass. Trotsky also impeded efforts against Wrangel's troops by failing to supply the Red Army adequately, resulting in soldiers attacking in summer uniforms during November. Despite these challenges, the Red Army eventually took Crimea, Wrangel's last stronghold. During the war with Poland, Trotsky alongside Tukhachevsky mismanaged the offensive on Warsaw, leading to chaotic operations and insufficient supplies. This disorganization allowed the Polish forces to break through the Red Army's thinly stretched lines, forcing a retreat. Trotsky further sabotaged the campaign by forbidding the capture of Lvov, redirecting Borodinev's forces northward, resulting in the Red Army's failure to secure western Ukraine and Belarus. In 1924, after Trotsky's removal from his military posts, a commission seized the state of the Red Army and reported that it was, quote, incapable of combat, end quote, due to the organizational chaos Trotsky had fostered. The general staff had become a bureaucratic mess under his leadership, lacking the capability to handle military challenges or plan effectively for mobilization. Mikhail Frunze, who replaced Trotsky in January 1925, was tasked with urgently reorganizing the Red Army. Chapter 8: Trotsky's Anti-Marxism against Lenin's concept of the NEP. The new economic policy, NEP, was a significant point of contention between Lenin and Trotsky, highlighting the fundamental differences in their approach to socialist policy and economic strategy. The NEP, introduced by Lenin in 1921, aimed to rebuild the Soviet economy by reintroducing limited market mechanisms while maintaining state control over the commanding heights of the economy. However, Trotsky's interpretation of the NEP differed drastically from Lenin's, reflecting his divergence from Marxist principles as understood by Lenin. In remarks made on January 8, 1922, Trotsky described the NEP as a policy that restored capitalist forms of economy by reintroducing the market. He viewed the NEP as a tool for developing and introspecting the socialist economy within the framework of capitalist norms and relations. Trotsky's focus was on the technical aspects of market mechanisms, consideration of the social, political and economic issues facing the peasantry under Soviet power. Contrary to Trotsky, Lenin emphasized that the NEP's primary significance lay in bridging the gap between the new socialist economy and the existing peasant economy. At the 6th Congress of the Communist Party in March 1921, Lenin articulated that the NEP was fundamentally about finding a link between the urban socialist economy and the rural peasant economy, which was crucial for the survival and consolidation of the Soviet state. The divergence in their views was stark. Lenin saw the NEP as a temporary but necessary retreat to secure the support of the peasantry and expand the social base of the revolution. Trotsky, on the other hand, failed to grasp the importance of integrating the peasantry into the socialist project. His proposals focused on using the NEP to stimulate the kulak class through tax policies that favored them over the poorer and middle peasantry. Trotsky's approach would have strengthened the kulaks at the expense of the poorer peasants, thereby narrowing the social base of the revolution and potentially alienating a crucial segment of the population from the Soviet regime. In contrast, Lenin's strategy with the NEP aimed to maintain and expand the alliance between the working class and the peasantry, which was essential for the stability of the Soviet state. Chapter 9: Discussion on Trade Unions. Trotsky as the leader of the faction. In 1920 to 1921, Trotsky and his followers initiated an internal party debate regarding the role of trade unions in Soviet society. This debate quickly evolved into a factional struggle, with Trotsky's faction advocating for transforming trade unions into parts of the state apparatus, thus questioning the leading role of the Communist Party in building socialism. Lenin sharply criticized Trotsky's position, particularly Trotsky's misunderstanding of the relationship between political and economics. In his work, Once More About Trade Unions, Lenin expressed his disapproval of Trotsky's arguments, pointing out the, quote, disparate confusion of concepts, end quote, in Trotsky's approach. Lenin emphasized that political stability was a prerequisite for focusing on economic tasks, and warned that Trotsky's ideas threatened the dictatorship of the proletariat by promoting a syndicalist deviation, a perspective that could lead to the downfall of Soviet power. Stalin also condemned Trotsky's factionalism, which he described as a petty bourgeois anarchist tendency. In his speeches, Stalin argued Trotsky's behavior, including setting himself against the Central Committee and refusing to fulfill party decisions, demonstrated a fundamental deviation from Leninism. Stalin highlighted how Trotsky's actions, such as ignoring the Central Committee's directives and prioritizing factional interests over party unity, were incompatible with democratic centralism, the organizational principle that requires the minority to submit to the majority and the lower authorities to subordinate to higher ones. Stalin recounted several incidents where Trotsky openly defied the Central Committee, such as his refusal to work in the Council of Labor and Defense and the Council of People's Commissars, despite the Central Committee's repeated decisions. Stalin criticized Trotsky's refusal to engage in these critical organs of Soviet power as a mockery of party discipline and an example of his disrespect for collective decision-making. Moreover, Stalin refuted Preobrazhensky's defense of Stalin's actions, particularly the idea that democracy within the party required the freedom of groups and factions. Stalin argued that true democracy within the party meant increasing the participation and consciousness of party masses, not the formation of factions, which he saw as a divisive and detrimental to party unity. Trotskyism, according to Stalin, represented a form of factionalism rooted in a petty bourgeois worldview characterized by disorganization, resistance to discipline, and anarchism. These traits, Stalin asserted, fundamentally at odds with the principles of democratic centralism and the organizational unity necessary for the successful leadership of the Soviet state. Chapter 10: How Trotsky opposed the workers' and peasants' inspection created by Lenin and Stalin to fight bureaucracy. In 1918, the Soviet government established the People's Commissariat of State Control, NKGK, tasked with overseeing the activities of Soviet institutions to ensure the effective implementation of central government decrees across all areas of the economy and state control. When Stalin was appointed head of this department in March 1919, the decree, quote, on state control, end quote, was adopted in April 1919. This marked the beginning of efforts to involve workers and peasants directly in the oversight of state institutions, particularly through mechanisms like flying audits. Flying audits were unannounced inspections that provided a means to combat inefficiency and corruption. I talked about an example in my Dictatorship of the Proletariat and Socialist Democracy video. By mid-1920, the NKGK was transformed into the People's Commissariat of Workers' and Peasants' Inspection, NKWPI, which further institutionalized the participation of workers and peasants in the control of the state apparatus. This transformation was a significant step in aligning state governments with proletarian principles, allowing non-party workers and peasants to directly participate in audits and inspections. Crucially, they were also empowered to remove officials from their positions if necessary. This approach was consistent with Marxist theory, which viewed bureaucracy as an exploitative institution that presides after a revolution and must be gradually transformed under a proletarian state. Stalin, recognized as a significant Marxist theorist, saw the NKWPI as a crucial mechanism in the fight against bureaucracy, reflecting his commitment to proletarian governance. He understood that the persistence of bureaucratic tendencies was a remnant of the old capitalist order that needed to be overcome through active involvement of the working class in state management. However, Trotsky opposed these efforts, particularly creation and operation of the NKWPI. His resistance to the involvement of workers and peasants in state oversight contrasts sharply with Stalin's approach. Trotsky's opposition can be seen as anti-communist, as it resisted the proletarianization of the state apparatus, a key element of Marxist-Leninist governments. Trotsky's reluctance to support these initiatives reflected his broader disagreements with Lenin and Stalin on the nature of socialist governance and the role of the proletariat in directly controlling the state. The efforts to implement a system of proletarian governance, where all workers would govern in turn, were consistent with Marxist principles. However, these efforts faced challenges and were seen as premature when attempted by Stalin's government in 1937 during the electoral reform and again in 1952. These initiatives were aimed at further dismantling the bureaucratic remnants of the old order, but ultimately proved to be too obtuse for the time. Echoing Marxist observation about the Paris Commune's rapid transformation of power from the Central Committee to the Parisian proletariat. Chapter 11: Trotskyism in 1923 to 1930. During the Eternal Party discussions of 1923 to 1924, Trotskyists made a significant attempt to challenge the organizational principles of the Communist Party. Under the pretext of advocating for, quote, intra-party democracy, end quote, they demanded the legalization of factions and groupings within the party. These demands threatened to weaken the party's leadership over the state apparatus and economic development, and aimed to sow discord between the party and its younger members, ultimately seeking to cause a split by setting the youth against the experienced Bolshevik core. Trotsky's article, Lessons of October from 1924, marked a clear effort to distort the history of Bolshevism and replace Leninism with Trotskyism. Trotsky and his followers sought to undermine the Central Committee's leadership, aiming to seize control of the party by predicting and planning for an inevitable defeat of the USSR in a future war, which they intended to use as an opportunity to overthrow the existing government. Lenin and the party leadership recognized that Trotsky's political and economical proposals would lead to the restoration of capitalism in the USSR. In 1926, various opposition groups within the party, including the Democratic Centralism Group, the Workers' Opposition, and the New Opposition, united on Trotsky's platform to form the Trotskyist-Zinoviev anti-party bloc. This bloc represented a consolidation of forces opposed to the party's leadership, particularly under Stalin, and so to derail the party's efforts to build socialism. Trotskyism was consistently condemned by the party at multiple congresses and conferences, including the 7th, 10th, 13th, 14th and 15th Party Congresses. The 13th Party Congress in 1924 identified Trotskyism as not only an attempt to revise Bolshevism, but also as a manifestation of a petit bourgeois bias. By 1926, the 15th Party Conference equated Trotskyism with social democratic views that denied the possibility of socialism's success in the USSR, further isolating Trotskyism as a counter-revolutionary force. Stalin played a crucial role in the ideological defeat of Trotskyism. Through his speeches and writings, as Trotskyism or Leninism, the October Revolution and the Tactic of the Russian Communists, and on the social democratic evasion in our party, these works exposed Trotsky's positions as fundamentally anti-Leninist and counter-revolutionary. By 1927, the 15th Party Congress declared that Trotskyism had fully broken with Marxism and degenerated into a Menshevik faction that was capitulating to both international and domestic bourgeois forces. The Congress approved the expulsion of Trotsky, Zinoviev and their active supporters from the party, marking the complete organizational and ideological defeat of Trotskyism within the Communist Party. Following these events, Trotskyism ceased to exist as a political current within the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks. The 16th Communist Congress in 1930 confirmed that Trotskyism had completely devolved into counter-revolutionary Menshevik positions and warned against any attempts at reconciliation with it. The defeat of Trotskyism within the Soviet Party was mirrored intentionally with Trotskyists being expelled from other communist parties. The 9th plenum of the Executive Committee of the Communist International, ICCI, in 1928 ruled that belonging to Trotskyism was incompatible with membership in the Comintern, a decision that was solidified by the 6th Congress of the Comintern later that year. Despite his expulsion, Trotsky continued his anti-Soviet activities from abroad. He was exiled from the USSR in 1929 and stripped of his Soviet citizenship in 1932. While in exile, Trotsky openly opposed key Soviet policies such as the 5-year plans, industrialization, and collectivization, further distancing himself from the Soviet socialist project.